Born and Bred in the Great Depression by Jonah Winter and Kimberly Bulkin Root. Where you grew up, on the edge of town, next to the tracks, you could hear the trains going by at night. East Texas, the 1930s, the Great Depression. In the tiny white frame house, there were 10 of you, 8 kids and your parents, in 4 small rooms. You slept at the foot of one bed because there were only 2 beds, and you were the youngest. You had to read by kerosene lanterns because you couldn't afford electricity. You got your water from a well because there was no indoor plumbing. There were no toilets, so you had to use an outhouse. I know, because you've told me, Dad. This was the world you grew up in. There weren't any jobs, or not many, and sometimes your dad, Grandpa Winter, couldn't find work. He'd make the slow walk home empty-handed, past the storefronts, over the bridge, all the way to the edge of town, where the poorest people lived. Waiting for him there were 9 mouths to feed, with no money. Some mornings at the lumberyard where Grandpa sometimes worked, he had to run a foot race against other men like him. If he won, that meant he got to work that day. That meant he'd won the right to sweat. In the hot Texas sun, painting railroad ties with tar, hoisting them up when they were dry for 10 cents an hour. Low-paying work was better than no work at all. During those years, you spent your summers daydreaming, exploring the woods behind your house. I wonder what you dreamed about. Were you dreaming of a different world? With no money for new shoes, your feet got tough as leather walking barefoot down the gravel roads, walking on the hot rails day after day. That's what you've said. But you've also said you never went hungry. There were vegetables and fruit from the garden, corn and okra, tomatoes, watermelons, peas and potatoes and collard greens. What you couldn't eat right away, your mom would store in mason jars, apples and peaches and pears, sealed until the winter. And there were always eggs, and there was often chicken, everyone's favorite, fried up in a cast iron skillet. How hard Granny Winter must have worked, feeding so many people, especially with you and David and Harry and Lou and Ada and Oletta, all too young to help. The way you describe her, Granny Winter did everything, cooking, cleaning, gardening, milking. But even as strong and as tough as she went a little crazy sometimes. You've said that she was so afraid of storms. She'd make you all go down in the storm cellar, where she'd cry and pray, wailing, "Oh, Lord, we're all gonna die." She wasn't scared of much else, though. Like the time a bull wandered into your pasture through an open gate, she just grabbed it by its horns and led it out. Sometimes it's hard to believe this world was even real. Maybe I've remembered it wrong. Did Grandpa Winter really know a hermit who lived in the woods and ate beans from a jar? Did Granny Winter really have to fire up the wood-burning stove every day, even in the summer, to heat up water to wash clothes on a washboard? Did you really see hobos leave little markings right on your mailbox, a code, to let other hobos know that this house was friendly? Granny Winter gave them mashed bean sandwiches and leftover chicken in exchange for their chopping wood, and while they chopped, your father would listen to their stories, ask them where they'd been. Where were they headed, sleeping in boxcars 1,000 miles away from home? Riding the rails from one strange town to the next? No money, no family. How did they survive? On the radio, you'd hear what life was like in those northern cities far away, where people who'd lost their homes had to move into shacks made of cardboard, side by side with other shacks, makeshift towns and public parks, Hoovervilles, you called them, named after President Herbert Hoover, whom many blamed for the Great Depression. I don't know what caused it, you said. All I know is that, poor as we were, my folks never took one dime from the government. Maybe they should have. Maybe that would have made life easier for you. But somehow, Dad, you survived. And there were things that made life bearable. A trip with your father to the ice house, riding up front in his old Model T to pick up a block of ice. At Christmas time, you might not have gotten many toys, but it was magical to watch the trains pass by, to see the blue lights twinkling in the windows of the dining car. And it was a good day if you got to play chess with your dad. Or to listen to him play the banjo on the porch in his special style, 2 fingers gone from a lumber mill accident. You tell me he read a library book every night in that dim light from the kerosene lamps after the cares of the day were done. When I think of the Great Depression, I picture a whole country of people, tough as Grandpa and Granny Winter, not giving up even when it seemed like there was nothing left to lose, waiting out a storm that seemed like it would never end, and then finally waking to the blue skies of better days. And I see you, Dad, in your little overalls, listening to the trains, walking through the woods, learning to love those things that didn't cost a single penny.